Carmona-Graf, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Capital Planning and Projects. As many of you know, I'm fairly new to the corporation, but I know that several of the board members are newer than me, so thank you for coming a little later than me. I wanted to start by giving you a brief overview of where we are with this project. It started a long time ago in 2012 when there was damage sustained to the seawall adjacent to Southpoint Park from Hurricane Irene, and that damage was impounded further during 2013 Superstorm Sandy event. So the board, your predecessors, authorized entering into agreement with Langan Engineering back in 2012, which allowed for reconstruction. It was amended several times after that in 2017 and again in 2018 to allow for regulatory permits. Of particular note, in June of 2018, we came to you requesting authorization to amend the contract with Langan to pursue a softer edge, which is a Riprap revetment system, which is more naturalized and tends to be where guiding principles and resiliency are leading. You gave us authorization to move forward with additional design services with Langan Engineering to investigate concept design, preliminary designs, and actually apply to the oversight regulatory agencies for approval. There are three entities that have to ultimately review the designs for this project. That includes the city's Department of Small Business Services, who has jurisdiction over permits issued along the waterfront, the state's Department of Environmental Conservation, who has several divisions for tidal and fresh wetlands, as well as fish and wildlife have to review and approve the contract, as well as the federal government, Army Corps of Engineers, thank you, who have to review the projects. Both the state and federal approvals have to be in place before the city's bonding authority through Department of Small Business Services will issue a permit for construction. We are currently at that phase where the revised design is under review by those oversight agencies, and felt it was important to provide an update to yourselves as well as the community about the proposed designs. I'm joined here tonight with two representatives from Langan. Mike Hunton is the landscape architect who's been taking the project lead from Langan Engineering, and Juan Rosario has been an engineer involved with the project since 2012. So they will now walk you through presentations, giving you an overview of the project. Our goal is to have the project design approvals happen by the end of the calendar year, but we don't have any leverage or jurisdiction to predict when both the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Conservation will grant those approvals. But if we were to obtain those approvals, the next step would be to submit to Small Business Services for their review and then issue the bids for construction RFP services. Finally, one thing to note, further extending the delay of this project is NOAA has a strict moratorium about work operations that can happen in the waterways, and so contractors are prohibited from doing any work in the waterways between January 1st and June 30th of any calendar year. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Michael. Do you need to read it?
Sure, I can just. Hello everyone, my name is Michael Hunton. I'm project landscape architect at Langan. With me is Juan Rosario, as Jonna had mentioned earlier, civil engineer project manager from Langan. We're really happy to be here tonight just to show you this project and where it's come from, its roots, and where it is today in terms of the design. So we're going to basically walk you through an overview of the project. I'd like to ask that you hold all questions to the end, but then at the end we'll open to questions and answers, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. So with that said, I just wanted to orient everyone to start. Hopefully everyone can see the slide. Those areas in yellow is the areas where the project is going to be focused on. Currently in these two areas, there's a seawall that is in disrepair. It's a seawall that's over 100 years old, and as Jonna had mentioned, really needs to be rebuilt. And so this riprap revetment from a resiliency standpoint, really for public safety. lot of it is stone wall. There are some areas that are granite and concrete sort of outposts that are going to be refurbished as well. We hope we can reuse that material within the design. But just to orient you, Fort Freedoms Park, just to the south of it, Smallpox Hospital, Southpoint Open Space Park as it is today. If you're familiar with it, there's a chain link fence on either side. This project would basically be within the area that you can't access today. So there's no changes to Southpoint Open Space Park. It's just providing access to the area you can't get to today. And then directly to the north of it is the Cornell Tech campus. Okay, so starting off with the existing conditions. These are some images of the existing stone walls are in complete disrepair and really need to be rebuilt to stabilize it from a public safety perspective. And the images on the right are our environmental review of this area, which includes test pits. And what we found in the test pits is that this area is really urban filled. Wait a second. So this area that we're talking about is really urban fill that contains some levels of metal that needs to be capped, an environmental cap from an environmental perspective for public safety. So the two main goals, other than the community plan goals that we're going to add layers to on top, is really public safety of rebuilding this edge from a safety perspective and this environmental cap that needs to be in place, again, from a safety perspective. We did take a good inventory of all the existing vegetation within this area, and what we found was the areas along the edges are mostly invasive species that have kind of volunteered themselves over time because of this rebuilding of the wall and the environmental cap that needs to be installed. All the existing vegetation along either shoreline needs to be removed, but everything within Southpoint Open Space Park is going to be protected and preserved as part of this project.
I'd just like to add that the project that built out Southpoint Park also has an environmental cap, which essentially means that there is a barrier, what's called a demarcation layer, that's put in place, and then 2 feet of clean soil is added to the site before you can do any building. So when the project for Southpoint Park was built, that had to happen, and that is governed by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They have a unit up in Albany that's responsible for administering all of the permits and soil operations for what's considered to be contaminated fields.
Okay. In addition to the vegetation we just discussed, we did do a study to look at the existing species and wildlife within this area. And what we found was that there are no endangered or protected species based on the review of the U.S. wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife lists. However, we do understand that there are species that live in this area, migratory bird species, songbirds, local, New York City. Right, exactly. So these species, we're basically going to phase our construction to minimize the impact of these species. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the park, I'm sure most of you guys are. Just some imagery of what's out there today. You can see the lampposts. Again, we're not changing anything to those lampposts. You can see that there's some existing, these are actually seat walls that were built with reclaimed stone from the previous Goldwater Hospital. And then obviously you're probably familiar with the railing that's being reinstalled all over the island today. There's also the cat sanctuary from the Wildlife Freedom Foundation, which we're discussing to be relocated to another location within Southpoint Open Space Park so that this project can be moved forward. So why riprap? If you're not familiar with the term riprap, it's these large rocks that you probably see along the shorelines along New York City. And in keeping with, as Jonna had mentioned previously, in keeping with the design and resiliency standards promoted by New York City Parks, we really want to use this riprap to stabilize and hard armor that for the future and sea level rise, but also to create more of a naturalistic transition between the water and the upland areas. So some history on the site. What you're seeing in this image on the lower right is in 2005, the Trust for Public Land basically finalized the master plan for developing this vacant lot into a public park. In 2011, they had a ribbon cutting ceremony. You can see an image here of what the park looked like when it first opened. And in 2012, just adjacent to the site, FDR Fort Freedoms Park opened, so public access to the southern tip of the island was now available. In addition, in 2017, RIOC retained Fitzgerald and Halliday, who's a planning firm, who basically did a community plan for this park. So now that we have this space, it was more of a process to invite the community in and discuss how we want to use the space to the best of its ability. You can see the process, some of the images on the right, there are multiple design charrettes, there are different voting opportunities for the community to really engage and be a part of this process. And then the ultimate plan that came out of it is the guiding principle, which we're referring directly to in terms of this project. So, some highlights. This is actually a recent photo, but obviously cultural and historical significance is something we want to pay attention to. Accessibility and usability for all. Creating a comfortable and inviting space. Keep really maintaining and keeping that natural environment feel to the park. Creating a connection to the water. Actually, this is what it looks like today as a temporary fix, I think, but really creating that connection to the water to make you feel like you're close to the water. And then inviting public art and performance into this space. And lastly, developing in terms of sustainable initiatives and implementation using native species. In particular, we want to highlight 3 points that this project achieves that's related directly to the community plan. One is providing access to the shoreline and creating comfortable spaces to enjoy the views. The second is to maintain a natural setting that encourages wildlife. And the third is to celebrate Southpoint's natural topography and incorporate hills into the landscape design. So this slide is an overview of the entire project. We're going to dive into more enlargements and views and perspectives we've developed to help you understand the design for the park. But if you look at it in general, Manhattan would be, north is to the right to orient you. Manhattan would be on the top of the screen, and Queens and Brooklyn on the lower side. Basically using a similar material palette within both shorelines, but a slightly different approach. I want to walk you through the western side first and then the eastern side. So as you enter the park by Cornell Tech campus, we're proposing a bosque of trees within the refurbished concrete bulkhead wall to really accentuate and welcome you into that park. Once you get past the bosque of trees, you'll see a tree-lined pathway. As I'm sure you're familiar, it's pretty hot in the summer, sometimes of the year. So I think creating these native tree hallways, you might say, to really create that shade, to make it a comfortable space, is something we're looking to do along that pathway, and really guide people towards Fort Freedoms Park as this connector. You can also see, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but basically right in the middle there's sort of an overlook space with benches on it, and we'll dive into a zoomed in version of that in a minute. But that's really refurbishing, again, an existing bulkhead, yeah. In order to capture those views. One of the big things in the community plan is to make sure that we're capturing these views towards Manhattan. Right? As you make your way down, then you have a choice of staying on the asphalt path and sitting on the benches that are the stone wall benches that are there today, or meandering through a reinforced turf path to really make you feel like you're in more of a park-like setting. Looking to use some of the reclaimed foundation stones and concrete and stones from the stone wall that we're taking down to more sustainably use those materials and incorporate them into the site, similar to how the foundation stones were reused within Southpoint Open Space Park. Plantings would be large shade trees, large multi-stem trees, birch, sycamore, all native species, to be able to provide habitat for the different species, as well as an understory of grass, native grass species, to provide that cover for animals in the winter months. In addition, we have another layer of site furnishings that we think can be really fun to add to this park. There's a lot of stone furnishings and very traditional furnishings. What we're looking at doing is potentially, and we haven't decided on the actual furnishings yet, but adding some more fun destination furniture within the park, single person studies, some group areas to really capture those views and you can relax and look out into the water. So that's the western shoreline. The eastern shoreline is basically using the same material palette, so it feels like it's all part of the same design, except what we're looking at doing here is a bit more organic in terms of form, a little bit less rigid. Western side kind of looking towards Manhattan and the city grid being a little bit more urban feel. The eastern side has a bit more meandering walks. We also include a walk that gets you down closer to the water's edge, protected by a ROC Curve, similar to what's in Brooklyn Bridge Park, and we'll show you some examples and photos of that later. We're really providing access to the water, and again, some fun seating arrangements within lawn areas and the reclaimed stone path. So that's an overview of the project, and then we wanted to walk you through some visualizations so you can understand it a bit better. What you're seeing is, again, staying on the east side, where that blue arrow is where a human might be standing, looking in that general direction, looking north towards the Queensboro Bridge. And this is what that view might look like. You can see you have the option to either stay on the path close to the park, as you do today, or meander through this lawn reinforced turf path, and there's optional different types of seating. And then you can also sort of get closer to the water, but that ROC Curve really acting as a deterrent from a safety perspective to keep people away from actually getting to the water itself. This is a section of what that might look like. This stone being the riprap that's going to help stabilize that shoreline. This would be the ROC Curve from a safety perspective. The path that's closer to the water. And then what's interesting is instead of just keeping an all riprap revetment, what we've done is incorporated plantings into the slope itself. So we have concrete pipe that's acting as soil, basically soil planters, so these plantings can grow within the slope and still be armored and protected, but make it feel a bit more pedestrian scale and a green infrastructure component to the design. Once you get above the actual revetment, again, another stone curb, native grasses, and then there's that lawn walk, which is more of that park-like feel. And then keeping with the community plan, really wanting to add some undulation and some berms and some topography into the design. You can see that we've added some curved berm elements. And again, that's really that, we want to have room for species and for migratory bird species. So these native grasses and these trees are going to help support that approach. We took a photo of what it looks like today, and that's the top image. It's the eastern shoreline. What it will look like about 10 years down the road is the bottom design. So really providing pedestrian access and those plantings along that riprap. Okay, so now switching gears to the western shoreline, so facing Manhattan. You can see if you're out on the overlook, this is what your view might look like. So again, using the standard Roosevelt Island railing, seawall railing, and then incorporating backless benches, seating into this area to really make it an interactive space. But you can see there's just the amazing views that you can get when you're closer to the water of the UN and the Manhattan shoreline. This view kind of shows a little better your options, and you can get onto that landscape lawn path, again, that park-like setting. And what the other thing you can see in here is these stone elements, which we're going to use some of these materials that was part of the old seawall and these foundation stones to really create this very sustainable character and pay some homage to what the site was previously. So back to the community plan, tying into the history of the site. Again, just a section of what that might look like. This would be the overlook with the railing for safety and really getting as close to the water as you can. And then the riprap revetment along most of the shore, and then your lawn path, and there's someone just relaxing on the reclaimed stone bench that's under the tree. The image on the top is it's a good image that kind of shows you what that existing stone revetment looks like in this location. Bulkhead, I should say, looks like as it's sort of falling apart. We're going to rebuild that with the exact same stones to a good condition. You can see how we're doing that within the proposed condition. We're also going to add the railing, and then we're going to replace any of that riprap that's been displaced over time. We're also fixing the concrete bulkhead and adding a railing sort of see that line of trees that guides you from Cornell Tech campus down towards Fort Freedoms Park. Okay, so a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So I thought it'd be good to show some imagery. If you're familiar with Brooklyn Bridge Park, this is something that the City of New York has really been promoting, access to the water and breaking down some of these barriers. And so this really, like the native plantings that are built into these riprap revetments is something we're trying to do in this location too, and it's something that we're going to accomplish with those soil planting pockets within the revetment itself. This image right here is probably a good one to describe the ROC curve that we're talking about in terms of the access that goes along the water. It's really acts as a deterrent. It's something that's been done before in New York City, and it's a precedent that we're going to use in our project as well.
I want to point out that Brooklyn Bridge Park was actually developed and built by the state and then turned over to the city, so it had gone through all of the considerations another state authority would have as they were in the design phase.
Okay, so again, open to questions and answers in a few, but we did want to walk through the construction phasing with you, just so you can understand when. We just hold questions. The construction phasing, want to talk through a little bit with you. So a project like this generally would have a lot of different steps in it. There's soil prep, site clearing and preparation, installing construction fence for pedestrian safety, demolishing the existing seawalls is obviously a big portion of it, and then constructing the new riprap revetment and the wall returns for the different bulkheads that we're going to be designing. And then that added layer of upland development, including basically the landscape park that we're building as part of this project, including the berms, the plantings, the walls, the reclaimed seawalls, and those sorts of things. What we imagine is going to be roughly a two-phased approach to the project, and that's what we're holding right now, is a 9-month duration for each phase. As Jonna mentioned previously, because of the moratorium within the East River from January 15th to June 30th, we actually can't do any work within the water itself, but we can possibly move ahead with some of the demolition upland, and then hoping to start construction soon after June 30th. And then just to show some images of what the phasing might look like, a key goal for this project, which we need to accomplish, is to maintain access to Fort Freedoms Park throughout construction of this project. So if you can see on this, the little red dotted lines are pedestrian access through the park. If this was a two-phased approach, what you see on the lower part of the screen is that during each phase construction within this black hatched area, we would maintain access, but a temporary pedestrian access on the southeast corner, northeast corner of Southpoint Open Space Park. And so there'd always be a flow of traffic through Fort Freedoms Park. During the western side construction phase, we would do the opposite, basically, maintain pedestrian flow through, and also have a continued access to that comfort station that's in the park today. We just did want to show you one alternate approach, understanding there's probably a couple different ways we might approach this once we get a contractor on board, but with RIOC really steering the ship here, we want to make sure that whatever phased approach we do this, if it's somewhat of a two shoreline at the same time approach, we would still have safe pedestrian flow through the park. Okay, so at this point, I don't have anything else, Jonna.
So I just want to add that one of the reasons that we are still exploring options for construction is that it's largely going to be mandated in part by the regulatory agencies, which do have input on every aspect of the proposed design. They are asking questions about potential means and methods. They ask for flora and fauna study. They ask for different tidal studies and such. So even just this morning, we received a third round of comments from the New York State DEC about the proposed design. So we feel that we need to take a look at when permits are actually approved to see where we are within the moratorium, and that's going to mandate how long the construction duration is and what phasing opportunities we would have to get the park done as quickly as possible. Finally, one last piece I just wanted to state is that there is a philosophical change about how to address resiliency, and there were, as you saw from the presentation, a number of installations that have been in place for more than 5 years. And what we find is that with the stone revetment system in very simple layman's terms is that the rocks absorb the energy of the wave action that comes to the shore in any of these events that we are now having more frequently. So during Superstorm Sandy, up along the Harlem River, there's been a gabion system in Harlem River Park that's been in place for at least a decade. When the city went and did inspections after Sandy to look at damage, that seawall did not incur any damages, whereas other pieces of the seawall along the Harlem River and the East River sustained damages, including our own wall here. Brooklyn Bridge Park, which also was open during Superstorm Sandy, did not have any damage attributed to the wave action. So I believe that was one of the reasons that my predecessor proposed this to the board as a design alternate in June of 2018, and then again in October of 2018. And as you can see, we've just continued to build upon that using the best practices available to the industry today.
Thank you for the presentation. The tape apparently was paused during most of the presentation, although I believe that this information will be posted online. Just to quickly go through the usual recital, this is the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation Real Estate Development Advisory Committee. For the committee, Howard Pallavi, Chair, Dave Capel, David Kraut. For the corporation, Susan Rosenthal, Gretchen Robinson,